Alright guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. What I want to provide to you today is basically a crash course on what you want to look for and what you want to avoid when buying a Humvee off of GovPlanet.com. There are a lot of horror stories out there, a lot of people trying to scare you, stuff like that, because they personally had a bad experience. As someone who's done tons of research, I want to save you the time of having to do that as well, and just tell you the main things I looked for that led to my good experience with buying a Humvee off of GovPlanet. So, first and foremost, this is a Humvee that has been sold on GovPlanet. This is kind of what the page is going to look like. This is an M1123, just like mine. That means, so my first point I want to make is you want to look for Humvees that have the 6.5 liter diesel engine, automatic transmission with park and overdrive, sorry, can't talk. The 6.5 liter and the overdrive are the most important things. You do not want to be stuck buying a Humvee that is only a 6.2 liter and only has 3 speeds, because that means the motor is going to be a little less powerful, and the most important thing is you're only going to be able to go about 55 miles an hour and your motor will be absolutely screaming. With overdrive, it's going to be much more appropriate for people who live in any major developed country, because you'll be able to hit at least 80 and cruise at least 65. So that's the primary thing you want to look for. Get an A2 truck. You can research what that is. Don't get an A1 truck. Okay. Second thing, this sold for about $11,600. That's a little bit better than mine. Even I won mine for $12K. So the reason this sold for so low compared to, let's say, some of these other ones on here, which I think these are ones that had issues, but say this, $40,100 down here. Don't know why it won't let me highlight it. The reason this sold for so much less is because there's no doors and there's no roof. I can tell you right now that the hard tops on Humvees and the soft tops on Humvees that are used and even new with the hard tops are going to leak. It's a common problem. The military didn't really care whether or not they were airtight, so you're going to get leakage. So if you desperately want the authentic hardtop Humvee with hard doors, that's fine, but you're going to be paying like 40 grand. If you're more comfortable getting something like this and buying a surplus brand new soft top for around $5,000 with everything included, the price may have gone up since this video or since I bought mine, so do your research before. But if you're okay with that, or a aftermarket hardtop for, I want to say, $7,000 or $8,000 with hard doors, which is going to be a little bit cost as well, you want to get something like this. Every 2-door Humvee can become a 4-door Humvee. You just have to take out this little closeout panel, so don't let that scare you either. Let's kind of dive into this listing real quick. Okay, so this is kind of how they tell you everything about the Humvee. Very rarely are you going to see 5 stars on any of these things. I think the people who rate them are a little hesitant to put 5 stars. These are military vehicles, so for instance, you're not going to see perfect tolerances on like steering control on something with the 37-inch tire, stuff like that. I wouldn't ever worry about stuff like this, missing mirrors. You can get all that on eBay. There's a few main things you want to look for. Obviously, stuff like oil pressure is good and brakes and all that. Blow by is a common issue. Blow by at idle. I'm not going to go into detail about what blow by even is. I can tell you, these motors, when they're new, they do not have blow by. When they're not new, they do have blow by, or when they are degraded, I should say, they do have blow by. A diesel should not have blow by. People will argue with me about this in the comments, but a healthy diesel should not have blow by. Yes, I understand a diesel can keep running theoretically for 100,000 miles or something with blow by, but just save yourself the trouble and get a Humvee that does not have blow by. You are literally not going to be paying any more for that, so it would be really dumb to get one that has a blow by issue. You can research on your own what exactly that is, but this is the first thing I would look for because it's common. You'll see a lot of these that have blow-by problems. Okay. Next thing. So let's just dive through these pictures because they can tell you a lot. And I'll zoom in a bit here. Okay. I mean, first thing, the paint looks really good. that's, kind of a bit of an indicator. It's not the end all be all, but if it has good paint like this, it usually means it's fairly new. Another thing that doesn't really matter but is interesting is the seats look really good on this one. I bought mine with torn up seats. It was fine. Animals get in there and rip them up. If it has good seats, that's a really good sign, but it's not something that should be a deal killer for you. For instance, this seat is like so faded, it looks like it's a different color. Lights I wouldn't worry about too much because you can just replace them. Keep going. Okay, so here's a view of the dash. This is probably the single most important thing when trying to determine the amount of mileage on a Humvee. What you want to avoid is going off the mileage that is on the odometer, because the odometer / speedometer fails all the time and they just replace them. And obviously the new replacements say 0 miles. So you could get a Humvee with 500,000 miles on it that says 0. Now, that's easily identifiable if you just do some simple checks. So, first check, steering wheel. Look how new this steering wheel looks. Obviously that means there's not a lot of use. Second check, turn signal stock. The paint is not worn off on this. It doesn't look worn down. Once again, that's a good sign. Third check, start stop switch. Look how the paint isn't worn out. If you have one with the paint's worn out, that means it's been started and stopped so many times that the guys, the soldiers' gloves have worn off the paint, or the Marines or whatever. This would be a Marine Humvee. Same with the light switch. Look how the paint isn't worn off. That's a good sign. Okay. I think they put this picture on here for a reason, and that is you want to look at this. Look how new it looks. I've seen a lot of them where this label actually has all the ink worn off of it. Same general thing I'm talking about. If someone's knuckle has dragged across that so many times that they wore the printing off of this label, that's a really bad sign. That means this Humvee's been put into gear, or it more likely would be on this side, but it's been put into gear so many times that they wore off the paint. That's a high mileage vehicle. Avoid that at all costs. The guarding, whatever they call these little rubber things, that looks really good on this one. So, that's a good sign as well. These pedals are another really telltale sign. So here's your bright selector. It's just like an old school pickup truck. Here's your brakes, and then here's your gas pedal. As you can see, all three of these things have some wear, but they're not terrible. If any of these look polished in one spot from the guy's boots, several GI's boots hitting these over and over and over again, that means it's high mileage. I would definitely avoid it. The gauges are almost always going to be screwed up. This is probably fine. They read low and high and all kinds of stuff. So I wouldn't worry too much about these. You're going to have to replace gauges. That's almost a guarantee. Don't pay attention to this. It doesn't mean anything. I wouldn't worry about seats, like I said. I wouldn't worry too much about seat belts. They just, that kind of stuff is what it is. This is probably another thing you want to look for wear on, but, I don't usually pay too much attention to that. All right, so this brings me, I think, to the third point, is you want to listen to how the Humvee starts. This is another thing that people will argue with me in the comments, most likely, but a Humvee should start right up on the first crank, literally better than probably the car you have sitting in your garage. That's how they're made, that's how they're designed. I don't know how they got it so good, but they just fire right up. Most of these military bases aren't in the cold, so you don't really get to hear the cold start, but mine would actually fire right up in even 10 degrees or 100 degrees. It fired exactly the same if everything was working as it should. So let's listen to this. I hope you can hear the audio, but let's listen to how this sounds. So I don't know if you heard that, but it fired literally on the first crank, and it had a smooth idle. It didn't sound like it was knocking or anything like that. People will try and tell you that these 6.5s always sound like they're knocking, or they're hard to start and blah blah blah, and that is not a fully functional 6.5 if it has any of those problems. That means there's something wrong with it, and don't bother buying a Humvee that has those kinds of issues. It could be as simple as glow plugs, or it could be as complicated as a issue with the start control box, which will run you almost $1,000 right off the bat. Okay, that motor actually looks phenomenal. Here's another thing to look at, these coolers, okay? So I'm trying to remember, I think this is the radiator in the back. This might be the transmission cooler. I'm not exactly remembering what, or maybe this is the oil cooler, this is the transmission cooler, something like that. If these are all beat to heck and they have 1,000,000 rock chips, once again, that's a sign of a high mileage Humvee. Avoid that like the plague. It's always good to see that this has a normal amount of coolant in there. Here's the blow-by check. Okay, so once again, smooth idle. See how nothing is coming out of that? If vapor is coming out of that, that means your Humvee has blow-by issues. Do not waste your time with that kind of Humvee. Okay, and we've got underneath. Obviously, you want to check for all the normal things. This one looks incredibly good. I mean, tiny little scrape there. This looks cleaner than most pickup trucks on the road, so that is definitely a good sign for sure. And you've got your tires. I would not even worry about how worn the tire is. They swap these in and out all the time, and these are super cheap if you want to stay with the Humvee tires, or you have other options like I put the Super Swamper TRX US radials on mine. They were way better than these tires. They are basically made out of like concrete. They do not grip anything, and they're super rough. Okay. So those are really the main things you want to look at when buying a Humvee. I can tell you the auctions are very quick. I forgot exactly. I think they last like 10 or 20 minutes. They're super quick. The price will more than double in every one of those auctions. So that's how that works. And then they even have overtime, which is frustrating because you'll think you've won the auction and it'll go into overtime, and then you find out someone outbid you. So you'll have to deal with that. Yeah, I'm just trying to think if there's anything else you want to think about here. But this is basically it. There's going to be extra fees, so account a few $1,000s to deal with that. I won't go into detail. You can research that on your own. But you'll have taxes and shipping and, just other fees. But guys, I hope this video was helpful. If you can think of anything else that I didn't cover, please leave a comment so we can help out all the fellow viewers. This is just a quick and dirty crash course, so please don't be condescending. I know some of you this is like your life. I'm just a normal guy who bought one of these, and this was the things that kept me safe when buying one. So hope you guys liked the video. Hope you can like and subscribe if it was helpful. I may be getting another Humvee in the future. I sold mine, but I will see you in the next one. Much appreciated. Goodbye.